it would be over there with Alicia Menendez, who will talk to us about white people in black schools.
I'm not talking about it by myself, though. You're going to come over and
Oh, if we talking about white people in black schools, I'm all about it.
What was your joke? How are you going to start this off?
Two white people walk into an HBCU.
HBCU.
There you go.
And that would not be a total and complete joke. There is a piece up in Black Voices called Being White at a Black College, an interview. It's a great piece. It's written by Mary Beth Gassman about one student's experience being a white student at a black school. But it led us to ask a bigger question about whether or not having students, whether they be white, Hispanic, Asian, anyone who's not black, joining a historically black college or university, if that changes the very nature of the school. We want you to weigh in on this, so remember to please submit your comments. But joining us, we have a fantastic community. We have Professor Awan Mance. We have Mamiya Aforo. We have Robert Charette, whose your piece was written about you and your experience. We have Taryn Azuna, and we have William Jackson. Thank you all so much for joining us. So Rob, since you were the star of this piece, tell me, why did you decide to go to a historically black college?
Well, it was actually a pretty complicated situation. I actually was transferring colleges. I was playing football at the time. And when I moved to Tallahassee, Florida, I felt like I had two choices for schools that seemed to be a pretty good situation for me football-wise. The one thing that was kind of the deciding factor for me was that I wanted smaller class sizes. So I ended up choosing to go to FAMU really with none of the historical aspects of the institution in mind.
So did you feel while you were there like you really stuck out?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, there aren't too many white folks walking around campus. And when they are, you kind of get the funny question from your friends like, oh, you know that person? Like, really? But chances are we probably didn't know each other. So.
Yeah, for me, I know I went to Morehouse, and I remember my freshman year, there were like 3 white guys, like only 3. So I knew who they were. We always knew who they were, and they kind of did their own thing. And they had friends and stuff, but every single person who saw them like grumbled or had some smart comment to make at first because they wondered about their intentions. Like, why, of all white people can go anywhere, why would you pick here? Was that your experience that a lot of people question your intentions for being there and your motivation?
I don't think a lot of people questioned it, but I certainly did get questioned about my motivation for being there. And I think what made the difference was that I was very honest with them about why I was there, about my background, how I came to be. And I think most of them responded pretty positively. And because of the football situation, I think that I was exposed to some more people that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. So they kind of knew of me before interacting with me.
Mamiya, you have a very different experience in that I'm sure you did not stick out the way Rob stuck out, but you were very much drawn to go to Spelman because you wanted that experience, in part because it was not the experience you'd grown up in. You grew up in a much more immigrant community, and that culture that you get uniquely at a historically black college was part of what drew you to Spelman. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Prior to taking a tour of Spelman, I was very, scared about the experience, just not being in a completely black community ever before in my life. And I went to the campus and instantly fell in love because I saw people with faces that were the color of me, but there was diversity. You could tell, there were artists, there were people who were involved on campus in various ways, the Greek community. All of these things were things I'd never seen before, and were so rich in culture that I had to go to Spelman. It was no choice after that.
So William, when you have non-black students matriculating to historically black colleges and universities, doesn't that change the culture of the institution?
I don't think it necessarily changes the culture, but it gives an opportunity for different people of different cultures to embrace the family feeling at an HBCU and to understand the dynamics of the population and the kids there. Because it's like once you're accepted into the school, everybody has this essence where they go through, they're new to the environment, trying to find out what's going on, making friends. But after that's over, it's like, everybody welcomes you together as a family. You make friends a lot easier. The class sizes are small enough to the point where you can get to know your instructors a lot faster as opposed to a larger institution.
You disagree, though, don't you? I saw you over here wagging
You
your head.
know, I struggle with this. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with people who, for good reason, go to HBCUs. Most of the cases I see aren't like Rob's, though. Most of the cases I see when I talk to people is that they were able to get special funding and scholarships for going there. I mean, there was one person I know who told me, look, I thought my GPA would go up if I went here. I mean, some of the reasons and motivations for going there felt so self-centered. Some were even racist. And it made me very uncomfortable. And I feel like there are very few spaces where black people can occupy for themselves. Black churches, occasionally HBCUs, certain communities. And I feel like those spaces are sacred in a certain kind of way. And for white people to intervene in them makes me uncomfortable in general.
How about Hispanics and Asians?
It depends on whether they're black Hispanics or white Hispanics.
So I would not be allowed to your HBCU.
I'm just saying. Well, I went to Morehouse, so again, you probably
Would not have been allowed twice over.
but you'd be welcome.
Thank you. Oh, I mean, when I was at Harvard, one of my jobs, I fundraised for Radcliffe, and anytime you'd get a Radcliffe alum on the phone, they would complain to you about the fact that the institution they loved, which was single sex, all women, no longer existed, and that, they were supposed to be swallowed up into the Harvard community, but that wasn't the same thing. I know that you are a professor of African American Lit, is that right? African American.
That's right.
And I know that you teach at it's not a historically black college, but I want your perspective on this. Has recruitment changed? And are you supposed to still feel the same way about an institution that is undergoing such massive change?
I think that's a very good question. I teach at a women's college, and the same question has come up at women's colleges across the country. Whether or not those institutions will remain single sex, and to what degree will going co-ed change the fundamental culture of the institution. I think one of the things that distinguishes women's colleges from HBCUs is the H in HBCU. Black colleges are historically black, but they are not specifically for black students only. And so there has always been a presence of non-black students at HBCUs. Certainly, once critical mass shifts, for example, HBCUs in West Virginia are now overwhelmingly white, with over 80% white students, the public HBCUs in West Virginia. But for the most part, the small numbers of undergraduates who enroll in HBCUs have not had a significant impact on the culture of the institution. Indeed, some non-black students are drawn to HBCUs because the culture remains one that is centered around people of African descent and the culture of people of African descent.
Taryn, I know you're writing your dissertation on this. Where do Hispanics fall into that?
Well, in Texas, there have been articles that came out that certain HBCUs, such as Prairie View, Texas Southern, Houston Tillotson, have implemented some strategic outreach and recruitment initiatives to recruit Latino students. And in fact, one institution in San Antonio, St. Philip's College, is a Hispanic serving institution and a historically black college and university because of the demographic shifts in that city. So what I'm seeing is that HBCUs need to be mission driven and market smart and to be successful in where the population is growing a lot, such as in Texas.
Rob, again, I'm skeptical, right?
Okay, sure.
But I think what you have represented is a good possibility for what can happen when someone is willing to enter a space like an HBCU with a level of commitment, a level of humility. Even if you didn't start that way, you got there and you were open to all sorts of possibilities. You stayed there, it worked out for you. You even joined a fraternity there, a second-rate one, but still a fraternity there.
Don't mind him. Ignore him.
Talk to me about some of the lessons. Talk about some of the lessons you learned while you were there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that I might not have started that way. When you were saying that you're skeptical of white participation, I think that it's fair to be skeptical. But I did start kind of in a colorblind state, admittedly, that I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. And during the time there, I was really exposed to situations, issues that I wouldn't have been exposed to if I would have
Give
been
me an
across the train
example.
tracks.
Like what?
Like, for example, the way that the media portrayed FAMU as opposed to Florida State University.
Mm-hmm.
So while I was at FAMU, I saw the value of the education. I saw, the benefits that I was receiving, and I knew that it was a top-notch experience. However, I'm sitting here reading the front page news, and all I see is bad news about FAMU. And then I see that everything's glorified that Florida State was doing. So for me, if I would have gone to Florida State, I wouldn't have noticed that. I would have just kind of accepted it as fact because it was in the newspaper. And so for me, I was able to see that because I was on the other side of the train tracks.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, William, my question is, there are a lot of schools that are diversifying in the opposite direction, right? They will have brown weekends, black weekends, especially the Ivy League schools or schools in places like Minnesota where they really need to get us kids out of the city and recruit us. You see the same type of recruitment going on in the reverse at these colleges. Is that about diversity or is that about hitting enrollment goals?
I think it's about diversity. A small amount of it is hitting the goal of attendance, but the curriculum at HBCUs are so that they're so diverse. It's like they offer some programs that other major colleges and universities don't offer. And then it's like the opportunities for the instructors with their backgrounds actually in that particular area, their experience, their years working in those jobs. And in some cases at HBCU, you have professors that are actually still employed in those areas during the day, and in their evening classes, they're readily transferring that knowledge to the students. So the diversity of the curriculum is important because it's open, it's honest, you share your experiences. Like in my case, I work with Duval County Public Schools during the day, and in the evening, I teach education technology with the education department. So what I'm going through during the day, I also share with my students when they take my education technology class.
Yeah. Awan, do you think it's about diversity or do you think it's about hitting enrollment numbers?
I think at the institutions where this has happened primarily, mostly the public HBCUs, it is, in some ways it is about enrollment goals. I think it's also can be about an idealized notion of what pluralism truly means. And
like that.
I think that's when it becomes troubling because the fact is that pluralism has not truly been achieved in higher education. And so there is a degree to which, in some ways, I think the efforts to, I guess, diversify HBCUs is in some ways putting the cart before the horse.
Can you break that down for a less smart audience member, or a less smart host, pluralism?
Right.
Sure. The idea that for all groups at the present time, the goal is that everyone will have the best outcomes if there are the greatest, if all institutions reflect the demographics of the larger country. And so there has been a push, for example, to push for HBCUs in, say, the state of Tennessee that are public to have the same demographics as the state as a whole.
So if you're
I think that's
hold
racist.
on, I want to recap for anyone who's just joining us. We are talking about this great piece that showed up on Black Voices talking about white students who attend historically Black colleges and universities. Does that change the nature of the institution? There's some great articles in our resource wall. Be sure to check them out. I stopped you from making an excellent point. I'm sure it was excellent.
No, I was just gonna say, I guess I'm frustrated by the idea that after 200 years of doing it right, we still believe that Black institutions could benefit from having white people in them. Because ultimately the pluralism argument with regard to HBCU suggests that if we added more white people, this institution would be better. I think you can make an argument that Harvard would be better.
Don't you make that argument the other way, though? Don't you say that if we added more people of color to
Absolutely.
traditionally white...
But black people have no shortage of access to white people. We have no shortage of access to white ideas. We're chock full of them. In fact, even when you go to many HBCUs, the curriculum, the textbooks, the canon, they're still shot through with European ideology. But when I go to Harvard, I need Black people there for Black identity, for Black experience, for access to Black traditions. And so for me, I don't think it's. I just don't want to fetishize having the presence of a particular race in a particular space.
If I can interject with what he just said, that to me, the diversity, the involvement of white students at an HBCU, it gives the opportunity to bring different ideas, different perceptions of the world into the college environment. I don't think it dilutes an HBCU. In some cases, it enhances it because when you're talking to diverse groups, everybody has a different opinion, everybody has a different perception. and you allow that to magnify what you're teaching in the classroom. I think that you need to look beyond just, like you were saying, white kids coming into HBCU, but you look at, we live in a diverse world now. So the students that attend HBCU have opportunity to get diverse instruction, and you look at it as at the benefits of bringing more whites, more Asians, more Hispanics, more Haitians, more Mexicans, whatever you have, into the learning environment so that you have different views and different
Hold on, let me ask you a question about that though.
Yeah.
So then what happens when I have to make an admissions decision and there's a white kid there with a 3.5 GPA trying to get into Morehouse College, and there's a black kid with a 3.0 and slightly lower SAT scores? If we're in a mission of diversity and fairness, do we then admit the white kid?
Well, to me, it's all fair. You keep it as fair as possible. I mean, you're looking at a college environment. There's different opportunities for kids beyond the grade point average to attend an HBCU. When I wrote my blog about the value of HBCUs just don't look at the grade point average as other institutions do. They look at the whole dynamics of the whole student, which gives a greater value to HBCUs in that case as well, because they have the opportunity to look at both dynamics: grade point average, background, family history, what have you, and all of that's included as well, not just.
No, I get that. I guess my bigger point is that HBCUs served a particular purpose. Part of it was to educate. Another part of it was to provide a type of experience. When I got to Morehouse, I was surrounded by black men. I was surrounded by images of Dr. King, of Howard Thurman. I was able to see something that I couldn't see in any other part of my life. I might go to the continent of Africa and walk into a city and see an entire government run by black folk. That's inspiring. And people talk about the value of that. When I go to HBCU, it's a very similar thing. I get to see an institution that's by, of, and for black people, run by black people, and having black people at the highest
So
levels of
does it
achievement.
make you feel special then that non-blacks now want to be a part of that? I mean,
No, because
shouldn't that in some ways affirm the very thing you're saying?
No, because I don't think that's the reason. I think that there's nothing black people love more than white people. And I think that one of the biggest reasons why black people love having white people in these institutions is because it plays to their ego, number one, and because two, deep inside of us, we still don't think we're good enough. That's what frustrates me. And it also tarnishes and compromises one of the most valuable parts of the experience, which is having all of us in one place.
Mark, don't you feel it's sort of disillusioning to some students who've come from all black communities and, put themselves in that situation again? When they graduate, they've never had an experience with somebody who doesn't look like them professionally or whatever. And you get out into the workforce, and I've seen this with a number of people who are uncomfortable now.
That's a fair point, Mommy. I mean, but then in that case, go to Mills College, right? If I grew up in Compton, and I grew up around all black people, and I'm a young woman, and I want to experience that kind of diversity because I don't need to see all black people all the time because I did that in South Central. I can go to Mills. I can go to the Bay and go to Mills. I can go to Harvard, where Alicia went. I can go lots of places. But if I want access to an all-black experience and an all-black tradition, all-black everything, to quote the great poet Jay-Z, I want to be able to do that. And I don't feel like, I don't want to feel like my school's legitimacy hinges on the fact that white people would go there.
All right, well, we're going to have to wrap this conversation.
I have feelings about this, Alicia.
Seriously, you walked on with no feelings and walked out with a lot
I have
of
lots of feelings now.
Mark Lamont Hill, thank you so much. Awan, thank you, Mamiya. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Taryn. And thank you, William. I appreciate all of your time.